This is old man Henry, a frail figure with trembling hands and dimming eyes, sitting quietly in the corner of his own family's house. The room is filled with laughter, glasses clinking, music flowing, but none of it seems to reach him. To them, he is not part of the celebration. He is an afterthought, a burden. His son whispers to his wife, "Why do we even bring him? He does nothing but sit there." His grandchildren glance at him with pity or annoyance, and the seat beside him remains empty, as though his very presence could stain the joy of the evening. Have you ever seen someone treated like they no longer mattered, as if their life was already over? That was Henry tonight, invisible in the eyes of the very people he once lived for. But that was not the worst part. What came next would shake the entire room, leaving every guest stunned and ashamed. And what would you do if you were pushed aside by your own family, only to see the world recognize you for something they never imagined? Would you forgive them, or let them drown in their silence? The evening was supposed to be a family celebration, a birthday dinner for Henry's eldest son. The dining room glowed with golden chandeliers, their crystals scattering light across polished glasses and silverware. The air carried the warm scent of roasted turkey, baked bread, and red wine. Yet for Henry, it all tasted like distance. The laughter of the younger ones, sharp and careless, echoed through the room as if mocking the silence that wrapped around him. Henry sat at a small wooden chair near the edge of the room, far from the main table where the family clustered together. The oak table, heavy and long, was covered with white linen and dishes that reflected years of prosperity. Yet none of it seemed to belong to him. Every so often, he adjusted his glasses with shaky fingers, pretending to study the framed photographs that lined the wall. The pictures captured smiles from vacations and graduations, milestones where his presence was either blurred in the background or absent altogether. His once broad shoulders were now slightly bent, his steps uncertain, but in his eyes there was still a quiet dignity, like a fire hidden deep in the ashes. His wrinkled hands, resting on his lap, bore faint scars that nobody in the room cared to ask about. To his grandchildren, he was merely the man who sat in silence, a relic of the past. To his children, he was an obligation, a responsibility checked off by inviting him to sit at the edge of the party. The sound of music filled the space, violins mixing with the faint murmur of conversation, but Henry's world was strangely muffled, as though he lived inside a different reality. Every time a glass was raised, every toast spoken loudly across the table, he could feel the invisible wall pushing him farther away. Yet, in that isolation, there lingered an unspoken strength. The house around him, though modern and bright, carried whispers of an older story, a history etched in the cracks of the walls and in Henry's silent gaze. The night pressed on, and while no one looked his way, Henry sat still, as though waiting for something only he knew was coming. The tension surfaced in subtle, cutting remarks that sliced deeper than any silence. Henry's daughter-in-law leaned toward her husband, her voice sharp though hushed. "He just sits there, staring at nothing. We could use that chair for someone else." The words floated through the air like poisoned arrows, and though Henry's ears had dulled with age, he heard them clearly. His throat tightened, but he remained quiet. A grandson, no older than 20, smoked as he scrolled through his phone. "Grandpa doesn't even know how to use this. What's the point of him being here? He's like decoration." The table erupted in laughter, careless, thoughtless, as if mocking was the easiest way to fill the space between courses. Henry lowered his gaze to his hands, veins visible under his fragile skin, and felt the sting of invisibility pierce him once more. At one point, when Henry tried to speak, his voice gravelly, trembling but earnest, his eldest son cut him off. "Dad, please, let us talk. You wouldn't understand anyway." The dismissal hit harder than any insult. The conversation moved on without him, as though his words had never existed, as though he himself had never existed. Henry's chest ached with a mix of sorrow and suppressed rage. He had lived long enough to know the cruelty of war, the cost of sacrifice, yet nothing prepared him for the coldness of his own blood, the family who saw only weakness in him. He tried to stand, perhaps to excuse himself, but his legs wavered and his hand clutched the chair for balance. His youngest granddaughter giggled at the sight, whispering, "He's going to fall again." Another wave of laughter rippled through the room, leaving Henry suspended between humiliation and despair. For a moment, his lips parted as though he might protest, shout, demand respect. But he stopped himself. The fire burned in silence, behind eyes that carried memories no one there cared to ask about. The night pressed on, and Henry remained at the edge of the room, a burden in their eyes, unaware that destiny was about to shift in a way that none of them could have imagined. Henry's silence was not born tonight. It had been forged through years of being pushed aside, years of his children growing up and forgetting the man who once carried them on his shoulders. When his wife passed away, he had stood quietly at the grave side, holding back tears so his children would see strength instead of weakness. Yet even then, he noticed how quickly they returned to their own lives, leaving him in a house filled with echoes. In his youth, Henry had given everything to his country. He had marched across foreign soil with boots soaked in mud and blood, had carried wounded comrades on his back while bullets tore the sky above. He had written letters home with shaking hands, promising he would return, though he never revealed the horrors he endured. Medals had been tucked into a drawer, photographs stored in a box that grew dustier with each passing year. His family never asked, and he never volunteered. Perhaps he thought they would one day see beyond his wrinkles, but they never did. He remembered the times when he offered advice, only to be brushed aside. "Dad, that was a different time," they would say, as if wisdom expired with age. He recalled birthdays where his gifts were politely received but quickly forgotten, holidays where his chair at the table felt more like a symbol of obligation than belonging. There were moments when Henry almost believed them, almost believed that he was useless now, a weight dragging down their lives. Yet in the quiet of the night, he would run his fingers over the old letters, the medals hidden away, the memories of men who never came home. He knew the truth of what he had lived, but truth is heavy when no one wants to carry it with you. Tonight was simply another chapter in a long story of neglect. But as the laughter rang out and the insults burned deeper, Henry felt something stir inside, as if the years of silence were finally reaching their breaking point. Because deep within his pocket, against the fabric of his worn coat, there was still one piece of his past he never let go. A piece that would soon remind everyone in that room that age was not weakness, but living proof of battles survived. The night seemed endless, the air thick with dismissal and laughter that scraped against Henry's pride. But as the guests raised another toast, a distant sound interrupted the harmony of the party. At first, it was faint, a rhythmic beat of footsteps outside the house. The chatter dimmed slightly, curiosity flickering across a few faces. Henry, however, recognized it instantly. His back straightened almost instinctively, as though the years melted away in that single sound. He knew the cadence of soldiers, the disciplined march that had once carried him across battlefields. The doorbell rang, sharp and commanding, echoing through the hall. A hush fell across the room. His eldest son frowned, annoyed, and muttered who would come here now. But before anyone could move, the door opened. Framed in the doorway stood a group of uniformed men and women, their polished boots glistening under the porch light. Medals adorned their chests, and in their hands they carried a velvet case. The family gasped, their laughter vanishing into stunned silence. The officer at the front stepped forward, his voice steady and solemn. "We are here to honor Mr. Henry Walker for his extraordinary service and sacrifice during the war." The room froze. Every pair of eyes turned toward the frail man in the corner. Henry did not rise immediately. His hands trembled as he gripped the arms of his chair. Then, with effort, he stood. In that moment, he seemed taller, his shadow stretching longer than it had in years. Gasps rippled through the crowd as the officer saluted him. "Sir, it is our duty to present you with the Medal of Valor, a recognition long overdue." Henry's children stared in disbelief. The same man they had dismissed, ignored, and mocked was being saluted like a legend. The same hands they had called useless were now being honored by those who knew the weight of war. And as the velvet box opened, revealing the gleaming medal, the entire room felt the ground shift beneath them. The burden they thought sat in the corner had just become a hero unveiled before their eyes. The living room, moments ago filled with careless chatter, now stood in absolute silence. All eyes were fixed on Henry as the officer pinned the medal to his chest. The polished silver gleamed against his worn suit, catching the chandelier's light like a flame reborn. For the first time in years, Henry's posture straightened, his chest rising with a quiet pride that no age could diminish. The frailty of his hands seemed to vanish as he raised them to salute in return, the gesture slow, but steady, a salute that carried the weight of every battle survived and every brother lost. The family watched, their faces pale, their lips parted but speechless. The grandchildren who once laughed at him now stared as though seeing him for the very first time. His son's wine glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor, but no one dared to move. The sound only made the silence heavier. The officer spoke again, his words echoing like a verdict. Mr. Walker displayed extraordinary courage, saving countless lives under enemy fire. His bravery was documented but never properly honored. Tonight, that changes. A murmur swept through the guests. Strangers who had come only for a party were now standing in reverence, their eyes glistening with awe. Some began to clap hesitantly, but the clapping grew, filling the room with thunderous respect. Henry did not look at the guests, nor at the friends of his children who had ignored him earlier. His eyes searched only for his family, the ones who had called him useless, the ones who had left him in the shadows of their lives. And when his gaze found them, it did not hold anger, it held the undeniable power of truth. Tears welled in his daughter's eyes as she whispered, "Dad, why didn't you ever tell us?" But the question died in the air, because everyone already knew the answer. Heroes do not boast. Heroes carry their scars in silence until the world is ready to listen. In that moment, Henry no longer stood as the frail old man in the corner. He was the warrior who had carried a generation on his shoulders, and the room his family included bowed to the truth that could no longer be ignored. The applause softened into a heavy silence, the kind that presses against the heart and makes every breath feel louder than words. Henry stood at the center now, no longer invisible, no longer small. His family, who once cast him aside, shrank back in their chairs, their faces flushed with shame. The officer placed a firm hand on Henry's shoulder. This man carried his brothers through fire, shielded lives with his own body, and never asked for anything in return. Tonight, the nation remembers what you chose to forget. His words were not meant to wound, but they struck harder than any blade. Henry turned slowly, his eyes sweeping across the faces of his children and grandchildren. There was no rage in his gaze, only a steady, piercing weight that forced them to look down. He did not need to raise his voice. His silence had more power than their years of laughter. Finally, he spoke, his tone low but unwavering. "You called me a burden. You saw weakness where there was sacrifice. You thought age erased worth. But age," he paused, his fingers brushing the medal now pinned to his chest, "is the proof that I survived what others could not." The words hung in the air, unshakable, undeniable. His grandchildren, who once giggled at his trembling steps, now stared with wide eyes, as if realizing for the first time that those same trembling legs had once marched through hell and returned. His son, who silenced him at the table, lowered his head, unable to meet his father's gaze. Henry did not shout. He did not demand an apology. He simply stood there, medal glistening, presence towering, letting the truth dismantle every cruel word spoken against him. The victory was not loud, but it was absolute. The family had tried to bury him in the shadows of their indifference. But tonight, the truth rose like a soldier returning from battle. And in that truth, Henry reclaimed his honor not through vengeance, but through the quiet thunder of dignity. The room lingered in silence long after the medal had been pinned. No one returned to their food. No one dared to laugh again. The air was thick with something heavier than shame. It was reverence. Even the grandchildren, once quick to sneer, now kept their eyes fixed on the floor, their cheeks flushed with guilt. Henry eased back into his chair, but this time it was not the lonely seat in the corner. Guests and soldiers alike shifted closer, their presence forming a circle of respect around him. Where once there was isolation, now there was recognition. His son approached slowly, his voice cracked and uncertain. "Dad, I didn't know. but the words sounded hollow, as though he knew there was no excuse. His daughter's eyes glistened as she whispered, "We should have asked, we should have listened." Henry said nothing more. He didn't need to. His silence now spoke louder than their apologies. The weight of his truth had settled upon their hearts, and it would not leave them. For the rest of their lives, they would remember the night when the man they had abandoned in the shadows stood revealed as a hero. As the soldiers prepared to leave, one young officer turned back and saluted Henry once more. "Sir," he said firmly, "men like you remind us why we serve." Henry's eyes lifted, calm and steady, and with that, the final word of the evening was not spoken but felt. Honor endures, even when love falters. The last image burned into every mind was not of a frail old man, but of a survivor, a warrior, a father who had carried a legacy greater than the laughter that once mocked him. If this story moved you, if you believe that truth and dignity always find their way back into the light, then don't let it end here. Show your support by liking this video, sharing it with someone who needs to be reminded of the strength hidden in silence, and subscribing to our channel for more powerful stories like this. Join us as we uncover more forgotten heroes, more family secrets, and more twists that reveal the true weight of honor. Because age is not weakness. Age is living proof of battles survived.